Boom, boom, konnichiwa, students. Welcome to Meji Japan. This is a really cool lesson. I always have a good time teaching it, and I'm going to teach you guys how Japan went from a medieval society to a modern society in 40 years. Japan made a whole lot of changes right at the end of the 1800s, leading into the 1900s. They changed from a society of samurai to a incredibly modern military society with airplanes and machine guns in a very short period. So this is a huge sort of success story of history, and I'm really going to deep dive into it. I'm excited to make it happen. So let's do it right now. So this is Japan of the past. You got these samurai guy, and you know, this is wild. They had color photography around when they were still samurai in Japan. I think that's insane to me. And then, yep, here's the new Japanese guys learning how to use guns. And yeah, you see Japan's now becoming more of a modern society. It's got kind of European-style buildings. And then what does Japan have? Factories. Factories is the name of the game. The Industrial Revolution came to Japan, and it came there fast. All right, so this is really kind of the overall theme of this unit. It's European civilization went from medieval times to industrialization in 500 years. And I've already taught you sort of all the steps that European civilization took. They had the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, absolute monarchs, revolution, and the industrialization process. And it took huge chunks of time and huge chunks of history. Kind of each step led to the next step. Well, Japan, it's going to have its own sort of version of a Renaissance and Enlightenment, absolute monarchs. It's going to have that whole chain, but in a period of 40 years. And at the end of those 40 years, Japan is going to end up being more advanced than many Western countries. Like, Japan's going to design the fastest airplane in the world and come up with all kinds of new technologies. And like, oh man, it's just so impressive how Japan caught up. And this sort of big question going on with this video series is, how did Japan industrialize so quickly? How did they convert their society from samurai swords and most everybody was peasant rice farmers to switching it up into now being a factory economy challenging the best economies in the world? I mean, even today in 2020, Japan is the third most powerful economy in the world. And I'm just like, wow, like Japan made the magic happen. All right, so here's factories in Japan back in the day. Yeah, here's some Japanese women working on power looms. Yeah, they are doing stuff in factories. And yeah, you still got the guys wearing kind of the traditional clothes and now wearing the Western clothes. Guys running around in rickshaws and trains going through Japan. So it was hard for everybody to catch up because the change was happening so rapidly. Very impressive. All right, so let's talk about how this whole thing began. Well, Japan, if you recall from my last Japan lesson a really long time ago, they were doing their whole Sakoku thing since the end of the Sengoku Jidai, their civil war. And Sakoku was, we're closed off, we don't want to trade with anybody, leave Japan alone. Well, that went on for like, 200, 300 years, and they were largely ignored, maybe did a little bit of trading, but that all came to an end on July 8th, 1853. An American warship, frickin' America, always invading countries, an American warship commanded by this dude, Matthew Perry, he sailed into Tokyo Harbor and said, we want you to trade with us. And Japan said, no, get out of here. And they shot some arrows at him. Well, he responded by opening up his cannons and just blowing up a bunch of buildings in Tokyo. The Japanese realized that he could, keep blowing up buildings all day. And then they said, okay, come ashore. We'll make a trade deal with you. And this trade deal that Perry signed allowed for anybody from the United States to trade stuff in Japan, and it gave a little too much power to America. It was sort of like, we'll sell you stuff for 20 bucks, and you got to sell us stuff for 10 bucks, even if it's the same value of things. So Japan got a bad deal in that trade treaty. And the Japanese people sort of had this crisis of faith where they said, wow, we couldn't even stop one American warship, the powerful nation of Japan, the samurai spirit and all that. And they were like, our country is behind. And this is going to cause some huge changes in Japanese society. Okay, so this is what most people in Japan were doing. But then look who just showed up. It's America, bringing a forced-on trade treaty to the Japanese people. And here they are showing off the American flag, meeting the Shogun. There's Perry. There he is meeting with the Shogun and the Emperor. And I love... Oh, hold on, I'm going to sneeze for a second. Excuse me. I really love it how Japanese historical art captured this stuff. Look at their impression of what these Americans looked like. So this is art they drew of them way back in the day. Okay, so after this defeat by the Americans, a lot of people in Japan were like, wow, America has those really awesome ships, those really awesome cannons, these really awesome guns. We need to get those too. And the Japanese emperor at this time, he agreed with all that. He said Japan needs to copy whatever these European and American countries are doing. We need to industrialize. Because they had all this power over us. We want to make sure no one else has that power over us again. So they pledged that they would become like Europe and America, or else they would just get taken over like the whole rest of the world did during the imperial era. So Japan's going to keep their independence by copying whatever the other people are doing. So here's a bunch of statistics to show you how quickly Japan caught up. The number of steamships. In 1873, Japan only had 26, but 40 years later, they have 1,514. The amount of train track. They only had 18 miles at first, but then they're going to have 7,100 miles in 30 years. Silk production, this goes up 12 times. And then coal production goes up 40 times. So the Japanese are making way more stuff, all with the power of factories. And yeah, here's more pictures. I just love Japanese historical art. It's my favorite thing. So yeah, they're bringing trains into Japan, bringing these fancy big ships. And yep, Japanese steamships, just like what the Europeans and the Americans have. Okay, so the thing is, the emperor and a couple of the nobles in Japan, they recognized the importance of change and of industrialization. But the shogun and the samurai said, we don't want Japan to open up. We want Japan to stay as it is in its traditional way. They were really afraid that if Japan opened up and allowed for global trade and copied Americans and Europeans, then Japan would lose its culture. It would become something totally different than what it was for thousands of years. And these two sides couldn't agree, so they ultimately had a civil war called the Boshin War in 1868. And this wasn't like the Sengoku Jidai. The Boshin War was pretty quick. And it was basically samurai fighting with samurai swords versus the emperor's troops fighting with guns and machine guns. And, I mean, who's going to win, a sword or a repeating rifle? So the samurai did not last. The machine guns just cut them down. And the Boshin War went to the emperor's faction. And after he won, everybody in Japan got on board and said, we are going to become a factory, industrial country just like Europe and the Americas, and the United States of America. So yeah, here's the picture of the Boshin War. I mean, this is from a movie, obviously. But yeah, here's Japanese guys using big old guns. There they are fighting the samurai, charging into battle, doing their thing. Okay, so at the conclusion of this war, the emperor was victorious. And as a symbolic move to show all the change happening in Japan, the city of Kyoto, kind of in the middle of Japan, was traditionally the capital city. But the city of Edo, later now known as Tokyo, was this growing city. It was the big port city. It was where a lot more industrial stuff was happening. So the emperor decided to move the capital city to Edo. And this move is called the Meiji Restoration. And it's the big symbolic change in Japan. Is now a very different country. Also at the Meiji Restoration, the emperor said, the shogun is done. The shogun doesn't matter anymore. I have the power. I'm making the decisions. Our country is changing. And why is it called the Meiji Restoration? Well, the emperor of this time, his name was Meiji. Meiji was the emperor's name. And I'm going to say this pretty confidently. Meiji was probably the best ruler in world history. Like, every decision Meiji made, I would give him a big, big high five for. So, one day in the afterlife, I'll seek him out and I'll be like, "Good job, Meiji." I'll give him a high five. So this was a very, very good leader, and maybe that's one of the reasons why Japan changed so quickly. But leadership is important, kids. Remember that. So, yep, there's Emperor Meiji changing the capital city, bringing the whole country under one rule. Interesting fact, when the emperor walks around Japan, this is still true today, you're not allowed to look at him or even look in his direction. So when they brought the emperor from Kyoto to Edo in this special box, everyone sort of bowed to him as he went by. And yeah, here's the new changes. So you see Japanese guys are now wearing kind of suits and Western clothes. And here's a bunch of samurai pledging their loyalty now to the new Japan, wearing these traditional European soldier clothing. Okay, so now the emperor just fought this civil war to take over, and he did achieve absolute power in Japan. But as soon as he got settled in Edo, now known as Tokyo, he said, "You know what? I'm giving up power. I want to be just like the United States and Europe. They have democracies. They have things like Congress and Parliament. I want the same thing for Japan." So he created a new government in Japan called the National Diet. I know it's spelled diet, but it's pronounced diet. And the thing is, the emperor really gave all the power to the National Diet, but he still serves as kind of like an advisor, maybe sort of like, you could think of him like the Supreme Court, like maybe he has final say over a lot of the laws. But for most of history, the emperor just kind of hangs back and lets the Diet do their own thing. And Meji's great-grandson, Akihito, is still the emperor of Japan today, and he still has a good role in the government of Japan to this day. So that's pretty cool. I know Akihito has a granddaughter who I think is a teenager. So the Princess of Japan, cool. It's a thing. All right, so yeah, that's what Meiji looked like. Super high-fiveable guy. And then there's the Diet when it was first created. And here's another picture of the Diet, of these people creating laws, having democracy just like the rest of the world. And yep, here's the Diet today. See a couple women in there now. It's a change in society. And there's Akihito. He's an old dude, but super cool. Okay, so now that Japan has got this new government, it's got these united people, it said, okay, how do we make factories? How do we make cars? How do we make airplanes? So to improve their technology, the Japanese government did an incredibly intelligent thing called the Iwakura Mission in 1871. So they gave a whole bunch of money to these 300 young Japanese guys, and they sort of put them on a tour of the world, especially of America and Europe. And they said, we want you to go to their big universities. We want you to meet the inventors. I mean, they met Henry Ford. They met Thomas Edison. And we want you to talk to these guys and to really understand the way they think and how they create all this stuff. So these 300 guys went around the world. Took them like 2 years. They learned all kinds of stuff. And as soon as they got back to Japan, they were immediately made university professors. And then they shared their knowledge with just thousands of other Japanese people, which just increased the production of Japan exponentially. So very, very intelligent move by the Japanese. All right, here's sort of the path of the Iwakura Mission. So yeah, it took them 2 years. They went all around the world, went to a bunch of countries. And here they are sort of meeting with European people. And this is sort of a graph, shows you Japan's per capita, the amount of money Japan makes. And for so much of history, England was beating Japan. But then right around this time, it's the Meiji Restoration, and then boom, the Iwakura Mission, and now Japan's economy is even more than England, which is just, holy cow, England started the Industrial Revolution, but it looks like Japan might be the one to finish it. And yeah, here's the American flag and the Japanese flag sort of being like, what up, Japan? We'll teach you all about electricity. Do your thing. And yeah, they brought those technologies back to Japan, and now what do they got? Electric carriages going through Tokyo. So super cool. The new Meiji government really reformed the old system of Japanese feudalism. That old system where there were daimyo and samurai and the shogun, it was all done for. They said, we're totally copying the West. We're going to have the upper class, the middle class, the bourgeoisie, the working class. We're going to have all that. So the old system is done for. And yeah, Japan really did push everything to adopt all the reforms that history had proven were effective in the European world, such as public schools, teaching advanced math, science. But the sad truth, though, is that during this time, eugenics was a big deal. And eugenics was traditionally taught that white people were superior to other ethnicities of people around the world. Well, when the Japanese heard about this stuff, they said, oh, well, the Japanese are better than brown people, black people, and white people. So the Japanese put their own spin on eugenics, and they said how they are the superior race on planet Earth. This is going to be a big problem in World War II. All right, so let's check it out. This is just kind of a funny little slide. This is the Japanese language. That's the symbol for woman, and that's the symbol for noisy. So yeah, I see what they did there, Japan. That's pretty good. Okay, so yeah, that old system of Japan's feudalism is totally done for. Here's sort of the new Japan, a guy wearing a suit. And then, oh, look, more historical Japanese pictures. Gosh, I'm so glad I found these. And then, yeah, eugenics in Japan, super messed up. And the samurai are gone. They made it illegal to wear swords in public in Japan. I think that's kind of sad. I would like to see a samurai walking around Tokyo. And then, yeah, there's Japan today. So they even took cherry blossom flowers and made a model of Mount Fuji at the base of Mount Fuji. Awesome. So cool. Okay, so yeah, this new Meiji world, the Japanese government was altering Japan's culture, okay? The thing the samurai were fighting against, it did become true, where Japan is now playing instruments traditionally played in the European world. They're copying their clothing. Everyone's like learning English and German and French. And yeah, in fact, some Japanese cities, I know parts of Tokyo, had these laws saying you have to wear European style clothing. If you're caught wearing sandals in public, you'll be put in jail. And it's like, whoa. But there's a lot of really interesting art from Meiji Japan. So let's check out this picture, for example. How many people do you see in this picture? I think the last I counted, there was like 10. So yeah, it's super cool art. Kind of like the Renaissance, hey. So yeah, Japanese art. And then, yeah, you got these guys wearing European clothes, women wearing European clothes. And yeah, why is this Japanese guy confused? Well, he doesn't know what culture he belongs to anymore. And yep, Japanese women wearing 1920s kind of clothes. Okay, and of course Japan also adopted European-style weapons as they used to win the Boshin War, and they created a European-style military. There were some differences, though. Japanese officers still carried samurai swords, and, well, during this time period, Europeans and America were taking over the world with imperialism, and Japan said, we want to do the same thing. We've got their same weapons. We've got their same discipline. We have better discipline. Japan will also have an empire. Hello, whoever is left. So here's the Japanese military now. And yeah, Japanese military guys with samurai swords. Japanese. And they're ready to fight. Okay, so Japan said, where can we start grabbing more territory to increase our imperial ambitions? And the Europeans had already taken over so much, but pretty close to Japan is the Pacific coast of Russia. So Japan goes to war with Russia in 1904. And the whole world says, oh, Russia's going to dominate them. Russia is a bunch of white people. So white people win. That's social Darwinism. Well, the Russian fleet sailed all the way to Japan. They had to go all the way around Africa. And as soon as they got to Japan, the Japanese ambushed them and sank their entire fleet to the bottom of the sea. After that happened, Russia surrendered to Japan, and Japan took over some of Russia's land. So, yeah, and Japan is always big at those surprise attacks, okay? That comes up later in history, too. So, yeah, and this kind of undermined the whole argument of social Darwinism, because it was supposed to be that Europeans are the best, but the Japanese thoroughly kicked Russia's butt. So Japan is already a growing country challenging European power. So here they are fighting the Russians, and yep, blowing up Russia's ships, charging into some of the forts on the Pacific coast. Boom. All right, so this is my last slide, and this sort of goes back to kind of one of these other themes I brought up, which is, did Japan's culture change? Well, I think the answer to that is undoubtedly yes. But did they copy European and American culture, or did they kind of merge it with their own culture? My whole life, I've been a big fan of anime, Japanese animation, and anime is itself kind of a combination of American animation styles and Japanese animation styles. It's definitely not an American thing, but it's a fusion kind of thing. And one of my favorite animes is Rurouni Kenshin. And Rurouni Kenshin is about this samurai who actually fought for the emperor. It's a samurai who wanted change. But once he wins the Boshin War, the story begins with him wandering around Japan, seeing everybody adapting to the industrial world, seeing people using guns, seeing the world change. And he says, "What's my place in the world? I'm the best samurai there ever was. But my skills with the sword are worthless in this new world." So maybe all this fast change in Japan left this sense of maybe we lost our soul as we moved so quickly to be just like the rest of the world. So, what's my place in this changing world? That is a huge theme in Japanese media. And where I'm going to get deep here is I think a lot of teenagers have this same feeling where you're about to become an adult, you've got to make big decisions, go to college, go to the military, go to community college, just start working. So, and the world is always changing around us. Like smartphones weren't a thing when I was in high school, and now smartphones are everyone's favorite thing. So, if the world is changing constantly, what is your place in it? How can you prepare for it? And these are big, big concepts. So, yeah, I want you to have your own answer to that. All right, so there's Rurouni Kenshin. This is Howl's Moving Castle, an excellent film. Highly recommend you see it. And yes, Steam Boy. So this is the whole idea of steam power coming to Japan. Princess Mononoke, excellent movie. And Final Fantasy VII, also a big thing about change in the modern world. All right, that's it for Meiji Japan. Peace out.